The spirit that rules the ocean calms the storm in man and gives him dominion over all things above and below. Listen to me, O listen, and you shall feed on good and thrill over the finest fare. Listen and you shall revive, by an eternal compact I grant you. Isaiah 55, 2,3. We have seen in our previous lectures that a thought wave of energy radiates in ever-widening circles through the ether at the speed of approximately 186,000 miles per second. The ether absorbing these waves cause magnetization in which these impressions remain and attracting to them other vibrations of similar wavelengths, thus thought becomes accumulative. These vibrations can remain dormant or active according to the stimulus given to them by the projecting or receiving mind. We must see then that you are a projecting radioing station. Your radio reads vibrations, thought. Now remember that thought itself is not a reality, it is a relative thing, but it is an active relative thing. Just the same that an atom is a relative thing but is an active relative thing. And within the atom there is also relative activities, but behind the atom there is the cause that remains invisible. The same is with a thought. That cause that is behind everything is yourself. Consciousness is cause. It creates a thought wave either by reacting to things external to itself or from an inward sensation or through understanding that consciousness is the power by which thought is produced and created. And by the same power these electromagnetic waves are created, so that the ether becomes magnetized, and that you have a thought in operation. These magnetic waves magnetize the ether just as a radio wave from a radio station magnetizes the ether in all directions, up and below, so that you can listen to a particular radio station in any part of the world and hear the same thing at the same time. So does a thought do the same thing? If the thought is strong enough and is projected by a consciousness that is aware, then that thought can be felt by receiving sets, that is, minds who are ready to receive or tune in to that particular vibration would receive them. Now a thought sent out into the ether becomes a vibration of a certain density, of a certain wavelength. If a thought of hate, anger, jealousy, or thought of war, or whatever the case may be, these thoughts are in the ether, they magnetize the ether, therefore all other thoughts that are created on a similar wavelength become accumulated, and they gather together, and this becomes a cloud of accumulated thought that sometimes moves across the whole world. If you are not aware and conscious aware, you may dive into that particular thought cloud and be caught up in it. But if you are aware that that is a relative thing and has no power over you, you can dive into this ocean, you can feel it, you can come back, and therefore you are not affected by it. Just as you can enter into the ocean and have a swim and come back out of the ocean and you are still yourself, so it is with these accumulated thoughts. What I want to show you in these lessons is the relative activity which most people are affected by when they are not aware of themselves, aware of that which is beyond mind. But how can you know that which is beyond mind, when everything else is in your mind? You create an image of truth in your mind, an idea of truth, and you say this is the truth. But that is not the truth, that is in your mind. But truth is beyond your mind, it is a living expression itself. It is the only power that can give thought an impetus. It is the only power that can create anything. You create then an image in your mind by yourself, and then you think that is truth, but that is not truth, it is but an image of the truth. Then you hang on to this image. What can this image give you? Nothing at all. But when you have cleared the mind completely and you know what the mind is filled with, that all these are images, ideas, reactions, thoughts, and so forth, then you become free, then there is love, then there is wisdom, then there is reality. And in that you become consciously aware of a power that can use the energy in the universe, and that is called pranayama. When the consciousness becomes aware that it itself is the mover in all what we call the universal energy, then it is pranayama. Just the same as if to use the energy of pranayama the consciousness becomes aware, and I do that. You feel that, don't you? Just as a split second. That is pranayama. I'm using the ether to convey an energy created by my consciousness. Therefore you can feel that particular vibration. We will never understand thought until we have first learned the fundamental principles upon which it works. Ether is a substance that underlies the whole manifested universe. It is also the conductor of all vibrations and is the subtlest form of cosmic matter. We cannot remove it, nor can any of it be withdrawn from the universe. It is space itself, for it fills all space, even the space between all atoms in matter, and the holder of the same atoms within its bosom. It makes up all matter and supports all form. Through ether only can matter or form be transformed. Therefore we see clearly that all atoms in matter and the holder of the same atoms is held within the bosom of ether. Therefore ether makes up all matter and supports all form. And through ether only can matter or form be transformed. Therefore how is a form transformed? Through ether. And how is this form transformed? Through electromagnetic vibrations in the form of thought. which is carried in the ether right into the walls of the atoms, and turning these atoms into different activities, bringing a different action in the atomic structure of a form, therefore is transformed. It carries light, sound and thought according to the length of the wave and frequency of the rate of vibration. So do all vibrations of tone and thought remain within ether for eternity. It can be dormant, waiting for further impulses to give it power, or waiting till the mind can steer it into activity. That is how there are angelic thoughts in the universe. The great artificers of the universe are artificers that are moving and molding the atomic structure of the earth and around it. In fact, we know from experience and from knowledge that comes our way, from forces outside the physical, but forces that are also existing just as we are existing, but who have an interrelated knowledge of the activities that are taking place in the interplanetary workings that are going on all the time. These artificers have a knowledge of the active principles behind the atom and behind the formation of worlds and planets. If you can grasp this truth, you will see that there is an intelligence always expressing itself through a consciousness, working in a certain direction according to its capability to receive and express. You are the same according to your ability to receive and express, so are you giving forth what comes in electromagnetic wave into the mind of the individual. And that is how most of these lectures are given to you. Because they come through from what we call electromagnetic waves, by striking what we call the receiving set in the mind. Then it is interpreted in the mind, and by doing so then the whole organism comes into operation to give expression to that particular thought, in the form of words, so you can hear them. And by hearing them it enables you to search in your own minds and souls, to find that which is behind and within. My words of any value whatsoever can only be for the purpose of making you search within yourselves and find the secrets that are within you. Ether is the cosmic recorder of all these impressions of universal life. Therefore, given the proper modifying apparatus or consciousness, all past and present thoughts, events, knowledge, wisdom, etc., can be reclaimed and reproduced. One day we will hear the Sermon on the Mount just as it was given. I have in the past explained to you that the past, present, and the future are in the ever-present, and the only time is the present. Therefore, not only the past and present but also future events can be extracted from this cosmic recorder. The future is eternally present, waiting to unfold at the appointed time. I am Alpha and Omega. I am the first and the last, the beginning and the end. I am the ever-present, past and future. Now, what you think today, how you act today, and what is in your mind today, is very often produced tomorrow. What you think in the past and what happened in the past is in your memory. It can become present in your consciousness at this very moment. The future can be present in your consciousness at this very moment. But you cannot produce or create in the past, it is gone. You cannot produce and create in the future because it does not exist except in your mind. And the past exists in your mind. All these things exist in your mind, the past and the future always in the present, but the present is a living reality. And you can only create through a living reality and not through a memory or through a hope. At the present time you are alive and living, and to recognize that life is eternal and immortal, and that immortality is yours. But if you are seeking immortality in the future by some means or whatsoever you think you may happen to get it, then it can never be immortality, because if immortality does not exist now at this very moment, it will never exist at all. Therefore in the future there is no immortality, it is in your mind as an idea, a belief, which is not a reality but an image. In the beginning the end existed, and all that exists between. It could not be otherwise, for what the Almighty decreed in the beginning is already finished, the end, unfolding the beginning. Thus the Christ, in man, is the finished product, yet the Christ existed before the world was. The masters understood the law of magnetization of the ether to be the great hidden mystery, and only by those who have acquired the wisdom and knowledge of this profound law can it be used with understanding and effectiveness. Yet not one of us can afford to disregard this law, for by it and through it we gain all power in heaven and on earth and freedom from ignorance. We do not yet realize the power of thought, and because we cannot see it we are apt to ignore it. The power of thought depends upon the consciousness that expresses it. The function of the process of thought operates with mathematical precision. It acts the same as electrical impulses to create form both within and without. In the words of the Master, what you hold fast below you hold fast above. In other words, what you create above you create below, and what you create in the inner you construct in the outer, and so you establish in the inner. This is why I said in my last lecture of the last series, when we are aware of the origin of our thinking and the action of our thoughts, we will know the result as well. Isn't that true? That is exactly the place of the Master. He knows the result before he begins, because he knows what the result will be. Did Jesus wonder when he turned the water into wine? We will come to the ways of how the Masters performed these feats. And it is what we call a transformation of the atomic structure of the particular liquid, whatever the case may be, by the science of the consciousness being aware to set in motion these electromagnetic impulses through the ether right into the very walls of the atom that make up that liquid, changing it, transforming it into something else. These things are not fairy tales, they are actual truth. And you have within you the very principle and the very instruments to perform these feats, but your belief in the facts that it is impossible to you, therefore it is impossible. Because what is impossible to you becomes impossible. What is possible to you becomes possible. But I will say this to you, there is not anything you think possible in this world that is not possible. Therefore, when Jesus said, "Believe you have received and you shall have," he was speaking from direct knowledge of a science he knew to be infallible. Therefore, if we understand the fundamentals underlying our thinking, what we then think is the evidence of that which will be produced in the outer, and here is the profound law: thought projected from the transmitting mind into the ether is in the form of electromagnetic waves with a particular wavelength and frequency. Inherent in this wave or impulse is the form and purpose to act upon the ether in such a way that the form can be constructed, for all creation including man is based upon electromagnetic action. When an intelligently formed thought with its tremendous power is let loose in the ether, it must not be ignored because of its magnetizing effect upon the ether. Besides, ether having its penetrating power throughout space, it spreads into the narrowest confines between the atomic walls of matter. Not only does it go through whole space in this magnetizing power that he had through electromagnetic waves, but it pierces right through the very walls of matter. Could you feel a wave that comes from my hand if I do this to you? Could you feel a wave that comes from my hand unless it penetrated through the very walls of the atom, through which your nerves then receive these vibrations and you become sensitive to them? When you have arrived at this state of consciousness, when you know that you can project electromagnetic waves by the means of thought, you can change a body. You can actually change it. You can eliminate conditions by your very powerful concentrated thought. That was Jesus' method in nearly every occasion, but it was not a forced thing. He did not crunch his hand and crunch his teeth and said this, and will you hear this? What did he do? With his complete understanding, without the slightest effort on his part, he did just this. He did that. Do you see now what I mean? Where there is no effort, there is a conscious awareness of the mechanism of the activity. And the masters are aware of these things. The masters told me that man is so constituted with a projecting and receiving set which enables him, when developed, to transmit and receive thought waves. There are two organs within the mechanism of man, the pituitary and the pineal. When man thinks, his pituitary vibrates according to his thought, and those waves pass into the ether accordingly. When man receives, his pineal vibrates and receives according to the state of consciousness he holds. These vibrations are interpreted by the mind, and man becomes aware of thoughts that magnetize the ether, and he gives forth what he receives by word of mouth. This again goes into the ether to reinforce the original thought. You have already been told that this method is used in all these lectures now given to you. In my early life I was aware of thoughts that came from nowhere, but when I was trained in the Himalayas I became aware they did not come from nowhere. They were specially directed. These thought waves are received and given forth again by word of mouth, so you can hear them similar to your radio set. If you ask me a question and I do not know the answer, I am only going to set in motion my receiving set and I can give you the answer. That is the simplest and easiest way, and that is a truth. And when your consciousness becomes aware of the fact that it is possible, then it becomes possible. The instrument is created and has been created from the very beginning. Therefore, a thought wave transmitted from a consciousness which is aware of the fundamental laws underlying it can permeate the whole universe and can be picked up by any number of receiving minds who can tune their apparatus to allow the wavelengths or impulses to set in motion similar vibrations within them. So the vibration that comes from above sets up similar vibrations within. And that is how you are sensitized to these vibrations. You sense it through your mind or through your sixth sense, which enables you to acquire a knowledge of receiving vibrations, because you virtually find these vibrations within yourselves to set up these 7 vibrations within the individual, and the individual interprets that. Telepathy has passed through the watchful eye of science and has been proved to be an absolute truth. I have seen in the Himalayas cellists in practice sending thought from one valley to another. First, each letter of the word would be transmitted, and the receiver in the valley beyond would write it down. As practice made perfect, words were sent in a similar manner until complete messages in the form of the idea was transmitted and received. Therefore it is training, but each and every one of you have the same capabilities. The same instruments are there ready to come into operation. But you have never allowed them, you have never thought about them, you have never been even told about them. Nevertheless they are there. But we need not go so far afield to find this out. We have many instances in our own lives here. Now, the peculiar thing about these people is this: to the outside world, they are illiterate. They know very little about the cellos over there, except the masters know everything about the outside world because they know all about it, but the students know very little about it at all. They are just young men who grow up there. They are illiterate as far as the outside world is concerned. They could never read or write nor do any of these things. But they begin their training by training their minds in this way. Therefore they are taken out, they are shown what to do, and some of them are very apt. Some of them are actually at once receivers or projectors, and they are accurate from the very beginning. They gradually move through one stage to another, from mental telepathy to other stages and so forth, until such time they acquire such a knowledge of the self, of thought, of movements of the mind and everything concerning the individual mind and body of man, that their knowledge is beyond 100 times greater than your best physician you have in the West. Yet they will not be able to read or write. Now, there is a tremendous fundamental truth, showing you how this knowledge is not acquired through books, as a majority of people get it in the West, but through actual experience, which is the greatest teacher. I could relate many experiences I have had in the West before I had my sojourn in the Himalayas. We are all quite conversant with the wonders of Jesus. He could see at a distance beyond the confines of man's ordinary senses. He could silence a storm, walk upon the water, and heal as easily as he could breathe, because he knew the fundamental laws of ether. I would like to go a little bit ahead, but I want to show you, eventually you will see, the fundamental principle upon which levitation and walking upon the water is acquired. You will see it is so simple in its application, only it means practice. But so simple is the law in operation, that man becomes as light as cotton, where the force of gravity, as holding him to the ground, is reversed. And the forces within himself then are attracted to the forces above himself, therefore he reverses the polarity. Supposing now that you hate within you and outside was cold. What does heat do all the time? Does it not rise to the cold? If you have any water at all now, this is a great point. We will see that the hot water always rises to the top and the cold water is always underneath. The breath that is taken in is hot breath. It always wants to go to the cold, which is the atmosphere above you. When you equalize the forces between the inner and the outer, you are no longer in any way affected by the polarity, or what we call gravity, because you have removed the force of gravity. You have equalized it between the forces that are holding you down and the forces that are throwing you up. And by your will you can use your body in any way you want, as levitation. It is scientific in its nature. So scientific that it is as accurate as mathematics. I am not telling you any fairy stories, because I'm telling you all that I have seen and done. So let us state some of these profound laws of the ether. A thought impulse travels like the wave from a radio station in a circuit in ever-widening circles in all directions, perpendicular and horizontal. That is, these waves go up in the atmosphere and go in a horizontal way all over the earth. And we go right away into the stratosphere, because an airplane in the stratosphere can receive those vibrations of a radio station just at the same time as you are receiving them down here, and are received all over the face of the earth and all through the whole of the stratosphere at one and the same time. So in ever-widening circles in all directions, perpendicular and horizontal, affecting the ether, causing it to be magnetized according to the wavelength or impulse of the thought. Now, in the ether there are millions of different wavelengths, of different thoughts and radio wavelengths, thousands of them, all at the same time, and they do not interfere with one another. Have you ever looked to see the distance your radio mechanism moves to get another vibration, to get another station? You take the knob and it may move around with your finger, but watch the inner mechanism and see how much it moves. It does not move more than 100 part of an inch. Less than 100 part of an inch does your mechanism move inside. Although you turn your knob is so made because if the knob did not turn more revolutions, then you would not be able to get a station at all. You would pass them by. And if you want one, you gradually turn your knob until you hear it coming into operation. But watch the movement of that mechanism. It does not move more than 100 part of an inch, and less than that. A wavelength can be a terrific speed, which is invisible to the physical eye. You have got so many waves to the inch, so many impulses to the inch. If you divided an inch into 100,000 parts, what would you see of that inch? Would you see anything at all of that inch? Of course you would not. Have you ever seen an atom? Of course you have not even with your greatest microscope. Well, some of these wavelengths are much less than the atom. Very much less, because they interpenetrate the walls of the atom. I am taking you into scientific talk on wavelengths. If you read any scientific book on the matter, you will see exactly what I am telling you is true. I am putting it in simple language for you to understand. The entity transmitting the thought impulse being the living life, creative, gives to the thought a living expression which becomes existent in the universe. This thought impulse will attract similar impulses of the exact wavelength and frequency, thus gaining power and momentum to accomplish its mission. Jesus knew that his word would not return void but would accomplish what he sent it forth to do. Because he was a master of masters and knew all these things, and his applications of them was as accurate as mathematics, 2 and 2 are 4, and it is simple. The universal ether is so constituted that the thought impulse will create motion and consequent activity, combination and transformation in the atoms of matter, ether being the basis of matter and the framework in which it is built. According to the state of consciousness, so is the concentrated thought that is responsible for the intensity of the activity and the transformation of the atoms, and accordingly so will be the distance reached and the effect of the transformation. I witnessed one occasion when I was in Tibet, when a man was torn to pieces because he had fallen down the rock side. His shoulder was torn and his back was torn and his leg was torn. He was brought up to the surface as if dead. Geshe Rinpoche, which was my teacher then at that time, was there. We were going along quietly between two particular portions of Tibet, from one place to another which we had to go, and this man was brought in. They knew, of course, the magic of Geshe Rinpoche because he was known all over Tibet. He looked at the man, stood over him for a little while, and his bones began to heal. And in less than half an hour, there was not a scratch or anything left on his body. Transformation of the atoms of his body was transformed by the power of this man, who set into operation that tremendous force of electromagnetic vibrations, causing the very atoms to form and reform according to the divine image in which it was created. That was a clear picture of what could be done, without effort, without strain, without difficulty. And when I was amazed at this performance, he turned to me and he said, "Within yourself, my son, is the power to do this. So is within each and every one of us a power that is latent, but has not been recognized. Therefore, a mind that is clear of all limitation and hindrance is essential for creative concentrated thought. That is why I have in the past tried to make you understand that it is imperative that you discern your thoughts. For a conglomeration of thoughts which contradict each other is of no value. You only create a distortion in the ether without result. Therefore, the combination and transformation will be dictated by the inherent intelligence and quality of the thought. The transformation will be accordingly. Consequently, a thought impulse will induce similar vibrations in other minds, which happen to be in the same wavelength of the original thought. Therefore, if your wavelength is in the same or similar, just as the woman who touched the garment of Jesus, the wavelength of her thought was this: if I could only touch his garment, I shall be healed. She pushed her way through the crowd. All the time she was endeavoring to get near to him, and when she did, she bent down and lifted his gown into her hand. At that very moment she was healed. He turned round to the crowd and he said, "Who touched me?" The disciples said, "They are all around you." Everybody touched. But he said, "Someone has touched me this particular way because I feel virtue has gone out of me." The very vibration of her vibration was the exact vibration of his. So therefore he felt the outrush of this terrific force into somewhere that brought complete transformation of the atomic structure of her body, and the woman was healed. And he turned round to her and he said to her, "Thy faith has made thee whole." Here again is the power of the Master who has mastered all impulses that rise from the Sabbasign through understanding and love. Therefore to condemn is to be condemned, for we attract like thoughts to the state of our own minds. So if anyone condemns another, they are already condemned. And they attract to themselves the vibrations of condemnation all around them. Little do people know that it is necessary for the elevation of the power of love and wisdom to be always in the mind of the individual. To feel and recognize those two pillars of creation as the fundamental and basic principles of a perfect existence. If then you will violate these particular laws of love and wisdom, you then bring destruction upon your own body and mind. It's very simple to love. It's very simple to ask for wisdom. It is easy for one to hate. It is easy for one to envy. It is easy for one to get into a rage. But when one sees what one is doing, and sees that this is the self caught up in craving, self-aggrandizement and fear and vanity, and all these things which are detrimental to man. When man sees how he is caught up in these things, then he drops them, they pass away. And when these things pass away from his mind and environment, that which exists eternally takes its place, love and wisdom. So simple is the expression of this, that it itself does the work. You do not create love, you do not create wisdom, they exist eternally. But you do create envy, you do create hate, you do create anger according to your reactions to things external to yourselves, and you do create fear. These things you create yourselves, you must discern clearly and understand them, that they are self-created, they belong to the self. therefore the self alone is responsible. And the self alone must remove them because the self brought them into existence, and the self must remove them by discerning that they have no power of their own and do not exist in reality. This state of mind can be sometimes spontaneous when the mind is caught up in reaction to the high levels or the low levels, or it can become trained through awareness and understanding to function mathematically, and sometimes it can happen accidentally when a flash of truth is revealed. Thus you can find out for yourselves through practice. This is why the masses still in ignorance can only associate with minds of similar thought, while the higher you go in the science of the mind, the fewer are capable of coming together. So minds are attracted to each other in the same manner as atoms are brought into close contact by the impulse or force of the thought wave. The masses crowd together because you will see they have got similar thoughts. But as you grow higher and higher and become aware of the great truths, you find less and less minds are capable of associating with one another. Between the grosser and the finer there is a deep cleavage, dependent upon the vibration of the minds which are able to receive and those which are incapable of receiving. That is why Jesus spoke in parables to the multitude while he spoke in secret to his disciples. The attraction will be effective both in the conscious realm and in the subconscious realm according to the attunement. Thus some can be healed by the word, others by water, and others by mud. Jesus knew the level each of his subjects was on. We are now beginning to realize the great power at the disposal of man. This profound knowledge of the fundamental laws of thought could revolutionize the whole world when understood. With one powerful, concentrated, and intelligent thought we can contact any point in the universe. Thus prayer, when properly understood, is the most powerful weapon we have. We can enter into the mind of another, we can create convulsions in the atoms of matter, we can make and combine according to our will. Some time ago when I told you that there was a great stress and strain in the world, that war was very near. Then by instructions which I had received at that time, and many of you know of it, we went into a silent state, and by doing so, we gave off certain ectoplasmic forces. Not only ectoplasmic but vibrations into the atmosphere. But this ectoplasmic substance was carried in such a way, transported through the ether, whereby it was easier for these spiritual forces to get complete contact with the minds to influence people who were at the head of affairs. And by this way a war was prevented where we were right on the very brink. Since then things have altered and changed. So we are at the present time in state of semi-peace. But you can never have peace with two armed camps in opposition to each other. You can only have peace when people begin to understand each other, and also understand the causes of war. When we begin to see the causes of war and how wars and antagonisms are brought about, then we will eliminate them from the mind of man. The present time we were just in a state of stillness. For these two armed camps, two ideologies which are fighting one another, and as long as we keep the balance we can keep peace. But how are we to maintain this continuously, unless everyone begins to recognize the causes of war? We can use the law of magnetizing the ether, our greatest advantage, for we can penetrate into the atoms that dominate matter. Dematerialization and materialization of matter are performed in this way, where inanimate objects can be transported through space, levitation and other phenomena are obtained in the same manner. We can reshuffle it with the arrangements of the atoms and change their rate of vibration, thus transmuting one element into another. In this way Jesus turned the water into wine, and by the same means we can produce and create phenomena as we please. Creation is nothing more than the deliberate releasing of a conscious intelligence in the form of thought into the passive ocean of ether to whip the etherons into motion to create activity and transformation. By the same mode of action, when we have gained this state of consciousness of the Christ, we can conquer the storms and the tides and subdue the ocean. Therefore knowledge alone is the basis of faith, which is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Can you now ignore this great power at your disposal? Then think deeply. Do you use it ignorantly or knowingly? Millions of people know nothing about this great power invested in man. This teaching should be the first consideration in the religious education of any man, woman, or child. This is the answer to the riddle, man made in God's likeness. If thou be wise, thou shalt be wise for thyself. Prov. 9:12. Benediction. O Mighty One, thou hast created me like unto thyself. In my ignorance I did not understand, but now I have found the key to thy treasure. O Blessed One, how can I thank thee except by doing thy will? Thou hast clothed me in matter, and I was lost in the darkness of my mind. Now the light that shines from the beginning showed me the way to conquer all things, as thou halt decreed. O Mighty One, I bow before thee. In thy wisdom thou hast made me like unto thee, and through the love of thy Son I found myself united in all. Beloved of mine,